Boy, things have changed in just 1 year for Florida State. At this time last year, they had a superstar quarterback in Jordan Travis, a star running back in Trey Benson, an incredible duo of Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson at receiver, and then a ferocious defensive line that included Braden Fisk and Jared Verse. That to go along with a good offensive line and plenty of great supporting players, everything was going well for Florida State. Head coach Mike Norvell had the Seminoles undefeated, and they ended up going through the entire regular season spotless. Unfortunately, they lost Travis to a devastating injury in that late season game, but they would end up beating both Florida and Louisville to finish at 13-0 going into the playoff selection show. Unfortunately for Florida State fans, they ended up being left out of the playoff due to Jordan Travis's injury, and you can say what you want about it. Yes, they did get screwed over, but at the same time, I do admit it was probably going to be more entertaining with Bama. Either way, Florida State did end up getting screwed according to the rulebook, and now they are in a terrible, terrible spot. They have lost 3 straight games. One of them was a humiliating loss to Georgia, and then these last 2 weeks, things have really gone off the rails as they lost to Georgia Tech in Ireland, and then most recently lost to Boston College at home on Monday. I'm not going to say that Boston College and Georgia Tech are bad programs by any means, but in the last few years, they have not exactly been near the top of the conference, and a team like Florida State, who was supposed to have playoff intentions, should not be losing to them, especially at home. I don't know what's been worse, the receiver room, the quarterback, or the offensive line, or maybe all of them. Florida State is in complete shambles at the moment, and in today's video, I want to talk about how Florida State went from a team that should have been in the playoff last year to now being a dumpster fire in just less than 9 months. It's really crazy, but before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about Florida State. So in order to understand this, we need to go back in time a little bit. The whole mess started with the departure of Jimbo Fisher from Florida State to Texas A&M in 2018. The Seminoles brought in Willie Taggart to be their next head coach, as he was one of the hottest names in coaching at that point since he had been the coach at both WKU, and he ended up building up USF. He turned the Bulls from a 2-10 program to a 10-2 program, and from there he went to Oregon and started their rebuild, going 7-5 in 2017. He then left early to take over at Florida State, but his tenure at Florida State can only be described as a disaster. He ended up going 5-7, missed the bowl in 2018. DeAndre Francois was the quarterback, who was a very highly regarded player, and he basically drove him into the ground since DeAndre threw for 15 touchdowns and 12 picks. He somehow managed to only get 700 rushing yards out of Cam Akers, and he was fired a little over halfway through the 2019 season after the Seminoles got off to a 4-5 record, putting the program in reverse. Florida State would need someone to kickstart the program since Taggart really didn't do much, and they would end up getting Memphis head coach Mike Norvell in 2020. Coach Norvell had gone 38-15 at Memphis with 3 American Championship game appearances and 1 victory. He didn't inherit a very good roster situation at Florida State, aside from Asante Samuel at corner. At the quarterback position, he had to pick from James Blackman and Jordan Travis, with no real receivers either. That, and the ACC was actually really good in 2020. Florida State would lose in Week 1 to Georgia Tech 16-13, and they ended up getting kind of screwed over by Jeff Sims, who was originally committed there, and then they got blown out by number 12 Miami 52-10. Coach Norvell was able to turn the ship around as they ended up beating Jacksonville State, and then got blown out by number 5 Notre Dame 42-26. They would then play number 5 North Carolina, who was looking like one of the best teams in the ACC, but Florida State was actually able to win 31-28 thanks to a massive halftime lead. They would end up getting blown out again in their next week against Louisville 48-16, lose to Pitt 41-17, and then NC State 38-22. Their next win wouldn't come until they played Duke in their last game of the season, in which they would win 56-35. Like I said earlier though, they didn't really have any players. They played 4 quarterbacks on the year, mostly sophomore quarterback Jordan Travis, who ended up playing in 8 games and led them with over 1,000 passing yards and 6 touchdowns, but a dismal 6 picks. All 3 other quarterbacks who played for the Noles combined for 4 touchdowns and 7 picks, with even less passing yards. Their leading rusher was Jordan Travis as well, and their leading receiver was Ontario Wilson, who had 382 yards and 2 touchdowns. There were some serious issues with the roster that needed addressing pronto. In 2021, the Seminoles brought in some more talent as they signed the number 21 ranked recruiting class, and they ended up getting Destin Hill and guys like Mackenzie Milton from UCF. But the schedule started out instantly really difficult, as against number 9 Notre Dame, Jack Cohn diced up the Seminole defense for over 360 yards and 4 touchdowns, and while Jashaun Corbin did a good job running the football, they would end up losing in overtime despite almost a miracle from Milton. Jordan Travis's 3 interceptions were the difference in that game, and then in their next game against Jacksonville State, Mackenzie Milton would start, and that would end up being the wrong decision, as even though Corbin once again had a great game, they'd actually lose 20-17 after the Gamecocks scored 13 unanswered and had that famous Hail Mary. Fans wanted Coach Norvell gone instantaneously, and it only get worse over the next few weeks as the Seminoles dropped their next 2 games to both Wake Forest and Louisville. They wouldn't get into the win column until week 5 against Syracuse, in which they won by 3, and they ended up having a really solid outing in that one. They then would beat Sam Howell in North Carolina the following weekend, and Jordan threw for 3 touchdowns and ran for 2 more in that game. Then they also destroyed UMass. They followed that up with a 10-point loss at Clemson, a 2-touchdown loss to NC State, and a surprising 3-point victory over rival Miami. They ended up surviving Boston College by 3 points and then lost to Florida by 3 to end the season at 5-7. Jordan Travis once again took over, and he threw for 1,500 yards and 15 touchdowns, while also running for a decent 500 yards and 7 scores on the ground. Ja'Shawn Corbin was leading back, and many were expecting 2022 to be a much better season. Going into year 3, Norvell spiced up the defense by adding a highly touted FCS player by the name of Jared Verse, and he ended up leading the team with 9 sacks at the end of the year. Other than that, the 2022 team was just able to make a bowl game, and Coach Norvell was on the hot seat. It felt like he would be fired if they didn't make it to a bowl game, and the Seminoles ended up going 10-3 and finished the year ranked number 11. So how did that happen? Well, they beat Duquesne in week 1 and then carried that momentum into week 2, as they then beat LSU and Brian Kelly in New Orleans. Jordan Travis outdueled Jaden Daniels with 260 passing yards and 2 touchdowns, and the defense held off a late Tiger rally to win the game. They followed it up with a close victory over Louisville, then the following game they blew out Boston College, and then they'd play 3 ranked teams in a row. They'd lose number 22 Wake Forest, then would lose number 14 NC State, and then would end up playing number 4 Clemson really close, but would end up losing that one as well. Now sitting at 4-3 with their hopes of an ACC title gone, they took out their frustrations on Georgia Tech, in which they blew out. Then they'd finish the year on a 5-game winning streak, beating Miami 45-3, Syracuse 38-3, Louisiana 49-17, Florida 45-38, and then they would beat Oklahoma 35-32 in the Cheez-It Bowl. It was a huge year for Jordan Travis, as he threw for 3,200 yards and 40 touchdowns, and Trey Benson ran for nearly 1,000 yards as well, and we also saw the explosion of Johnny Wilson at receiver. Okay, so in year 4, things really got good. Coach Norvell saved his job, and in 2023, there were some serious expectations for the Noles, especially with Clemson starting to look like they weren't as good anymore. They got right back to bowling number 5 LSU in the first game of the season, winning 45-24 in Orlando. This shot them all the way up to number 4 of the playoff rankings, and they were already looking like a championship contender. They'd roll over Southern Miss 66-13, but then barely survive Boston College 31-29 a week later. This proved to be the wake-up call that the Noles needed, because they then gritted out a tough overtime win against Clemson 31-24 because of a Keon Coleman touchdown, and then Virginia Tech 39-17. They'd also dropped 41 points in a win over Syracuse and beat number 16 Duke 38-20. They'd end up putting more points on the board against Wake Forest, survive Pitt, and then beat their arch rival Miami 27-20 in what was a really thrilling game. They ended up being undefeated going into their tune-up game against FCS level North Alabama, and a lot of their success that season was because of their star quarterback Jordan Travis, who at that point had nearly 2,800 yards and 20 touchdowns with just 2 picks. He was a legitimate Heisman candidate, and then the Seminoles had the worst play of the season. He ended up having an excruciating leg injury against North Alabama, and had people saying that they weren't a playoff team without him. They ended up dropping to number 5 in the rankings because of it, and then sleepwalked through their rivalry game with Florida, winning 24-15, and then beat number 14 Louisville in the conference championship game. They did win 16-6, but it wasn't enough to get them back into the playoff rankings. The season was ripped away from them, and a lot of players gave up instead of playing in the Orange Bowl against Georgia. Just by watching the game, it was clear that Florida State didn't want to be there and wasn't even trying, as Georgia killed them 63-3. On the season, Benson ended up running for 900 yards and 14 touchdowns. Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson were both incredible at the receiver spot. And then there's so many question marks and what-ifs because of Jordan Travis's injury. 1, would they have made the playoff? 2, how far could they have gone? And could they have won a national title? That's what many people are wondering. Well, because Mike Norvell done such a good job and built Florida State back to where they should be, expectations were really high going into 2024. And even though Jordan Travis, Jared Verse, and all of those star players were gone, many thought they'd just plug players in and it'd be the same. They got DJ Uiagalelei from Oregon State, they got Roydell Williams at running back from Alabama, and they brought in a couple of big names on the defensive side of the ball. Honestly, those moves didn't look too bad, as DJ was a former 5-star and seemingly did resurrect his career at OSU. But obviously through 2 games so far, it's been a nightmare for the Noles. They lost in Ireland in week 1 against Georgia Tech 21-24, and then this past week they lost to Boston College 28-13, and they now start the season at 0-2 with an 0-2 mark in the conference as well. Part of the reason for this is that Florida State's offense is just awful right now. Alec Atkins is their offensive coordinator this year, and it's his 3rd year being the OC. He looked like a big up-and-comer in the coaching world after the last 5 years, but his leading rusher on the team has 48 yards through 2 games, and DJU looks like he has no idea what he's doing. Through 2 games, he has 465 yards with 1 touchdown and an interception, but it's more so his body language and just the dumb decisions he's been making. He looks completely mentally lost and mentally broken, and it's really sad to see. Their defense under longtime head coaches Randy Shannon and Adam Fuller is also just randomly bad. I remember some people in the preseason said Florida State would have one of the best defensive lines in the country. That has been non-existent. I have no idea what's going on at Florida State, but nothing is really going their way right now. It seems like the players and coaches have completely transformed into different people. Maybe it's because they don't have a ton of 5th and 6th year players on the roster, or maybe it's because they thought they were better than they were. Jordan Travis and those guys really had to fight and claw to make a name for themselves, whereas the players coming in probably just expected to be good and expected to be the number 10 team in the country. It really is unfortunate to watch what has happened, and while Florida State does have time to save the season, there are a ton of question marks. Will DJ finish the season as a starter? Who the heck is going to run the ball? Who else will catch passes besides Ja'Kai Douglas? And will the defense step up and make stops? You also have people who are trying to get rid of the Seminole War chant on 3rd downs, and the funny joke is that they need to stop someone on 3rd down first. But either way, Florida State went from a team that should have been in the playoff with a Heisman-level quarterback to now being 0-3 in their last 3 games, and I can't tell you which one was the most embarrassing. Probably the Georgia one. But no matter what, I hope Florida State gets back on track, and what do you guys think? Why do you think the Noles have been so disappointing this year, and what do they have to do to fix their fortunes? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.